Black waitress feeds. Blind boy. She has no idea his billionaire father is watching rain fell in a slow, steady rhythm outside the small diner tucked between a laundromat and a liquor store in the south side of Chicago. It was a Tuesday night, late enough that most of the booths had emptied out, leaving behind only the hum of the overhead lights and the occasional clink of silverware from the kitchen. Sarah Daniels, 27, stood behind the counter, wiping down coffee cups for the third time that evening. Her back ached, her feet throbbed, but rent was due next week, and her second job cleaning offices wasn't paying any better than this. She didn't notice the boy at first. He had come quietly, guided by the soft tap of his white cane on wet pavement. He found his way to the metal bench just outside the diner window and sat down. His jeans were soaked to the knee. His hoodie clung to his small frame. And still, he sat perfectly still, like he was used to being forgotten. Inside, Sarah poured another cup of coffee for the trucker in booth 5 and offered him her best tired smile. She was halfway through counting her tips when her eyes drifted toward the window. That's when she saw him. At first, she thought maybe he was just waiting for someone. But as the rain grew heavier and the boy didn't move, concern crept into her chest like a cold draft. She walked to the window and peered closer. The boy's head was tilted slightly down, his hands clutching the cane, not in fear, but in quiet resolve. Sarah didn't think. She just moved. By the time she burst out of the diner and ran to him, the rain had drenched her apron and flattened her curls against her forehead. She crouched beside him, heart pounding. "Hey," she said gently. "Sweetheart, are you okay?" The boy didn't flinch. He turned his head slightly toward her voice. "I'm fine," he said, voice soft and even. "I'm just waiting." "Waiting for who?" "My dad," the boy said. "He had a meeting. He told me to sit here." Sarah blinked. "In the rain?" "He didn't know it was raining when he left," the boy said quickly, as if defending him, "and I didn't want to bother him." Sarah looked around. There was a sleek black SUV parked across the street, windows tinted so dark it looked empty. She wondered if that was where the boy's father had gone. She also wondered what kind of man would leave his child, blind and alone, in a thunderstorm. "How long have you been out here?" she asked. "I don't know," the boy whispered. "A while, I think." Sarah stood up and held out her hand. "Come inside with me." "Let's get you dry and warm. Your dad can come find you when he's ready." He hesitated. "He told me to wait here." "I'm not going to let anything happen to you, baby," Sarah said, her voice firmer now. "You've waited long enough." The boy reached for her hand. It was cold, small, but trusting. Inside the diner, Sarah sat him at a booth near the heater. She grabbed a towel from the back and gently dried his hair, then brought out the last bowl of chicken gumbo she had been saving for her own break. She didn't care. The boy needed it more. "What's your name?" she asked as she stirred the soup to cool it. "Isaiah." "Nice to meet you, Isaiah. I'm Sarah." He nodded, shy but not afraid. Across the street, behind the windshield of the black SUV, Malcolm Grant watched the scene unfold. His eyes, usually sharp with the edge of corporate ruthlessness, were fixed on the woman. He saw how she wiped Isaiah's face, how she fed him each spoonful with care, how she spoke with warmth, not pity, and something in him, something long buried, shifted. Malcolm had built an empire from scratch. Grant Holdings spanned real estate, tech, and luxury investments. He had survived hostile takeovers, courtroom battles, and political games. But nothing had prepared him for fatherhood. Not after losing Mia, Isaiah's mother, during childbirth. Not after the crushing guilt he carried. Not after watching his son grow up without a single image of his mother's smile or his own face. He had done what he could, hired the best private teachers, provided every therapy and every tool, but emotionally, he had stayed distant, unintentionally, but steadily. And now, watching his son smile faintly in the presence of a stranger, he realized how far he had drifted from the one person who needed him most. Malcolm closed the laptop on his lap, ending the meeting he hadn't really been present for, and stepped out into the rain. Sarah looked up just as the door chimed. The man who walked in wore an expensive coat and a face carved from stone. He was tall, broad-shouldered, and carried himself like a man used to owning the room. But his eyes, when they landed on the boy in the booth, softened. "Dad," Isaiah said, sensing his presence instantly. Malcolm knelt beside the booth and cupped his son's damp hand. "I'm sorry, son," he said quietly. "I shouldn't have left you." Isaiah leaned forward, touching his father's face to confirm. "You're here now," he whispered. Sarah stepped back, unsure if she should excuse herself, but Malcolm turned to her. "Thank you," he said. It wasn't polite, it was sincere. Deep. Sarah blinked. "I just couldn't let him sit out there like that." "Most people would have," Malcolm said. "You didn't." He reached into his coat pocket, pulled out a card, and placed it on the counter. "I'd like to talk more. When you're off work." Sarah picked up the card. Embossed letters read, "Malcolm Grant, CEO, Grant Holdings." She glanced between him and Isaiah. "Sure," she said slowly. "I get off at 10. Malcolm nodded once and turned back to his son. "Let's get you home." As they walked out together, Sarah stood in the doorway, the rain still trickling behind her, the air charged with something she couldn't quite name. She had no idea that the moment she stepped into the storm, everything in her life had already begun to change. Sarah didn't sleep much that night. After she finished her shift, she walked home under the faint glow of streetlights, her sneakers soaking through from the earlier rain. Clutched in her hand was Malcolm Grant's business card. She had stared at it for hours, turning it over between her fingers like it might change shape or disappear. She didn't know what kind of man he really was. But she had seen something that night, something she hadn't expected. Not the tailored suit or the billion-dollar name. It was the way he knelt beside his son, voice low and shaken. That moment stuck with her, more than any fancy title or money ever could. The next morning, her roommate Ava sat on the couch, sipping instant coffee while scrolling on her phone. "You're up early," Ava said, eyeing Sarah's tired face. Sarah hesitated, then held up the business card. Ava raised an eyebrow. "Whoa, Grant Holdings." "Wait, is this the Malcolm Grant?" Sarah nodded slowly. Ava sat up straight. "Girl, are you serious?" "He's like Forbes cover serious. What's the story?" Sarah explained everything. The boy, the rain, the diner. When she finished, Ava whistled low. "And he gave you this card just like that?" "Yeah," Sarah said. "Said he wanted to talk." "About what?" Sarah shrugged. "No clue. Maybe to say thank you again. Maybe something else." Ava leaned back. "Well, don't get played. These rich types, they always come with a catch." Sarah nodded, but her thoughts were already 1,000 miles away. That boy, Isaiah, he hadn't said much, but the way he gripped her hand, the quiet way he smiled when she fed him, it had stayed with her. Something about him stirred instincts in her she hadn't felt since her little brother passed. That same sense of wanting to protect, to comfort. Later that day, as promised, Malcolm called. "Ms. Daniels?" His voice came through her cracked phone speaker, smoother than she remembered. "Would you be free for dinner?" "Somewhere quiet." Sarah hesitated. "I can meet after my shift, but I'm not looking for a handout, Mr. Grant, just so we're clear. There was a pause on the line. Neither am I, he said. See you at Leona's, 8 o'clock. She had to borrow a coat from Ava. Her best dress was a faded navy thing she wore to church on Easter Sunday. But she arrived on time, nervous, but standing tall. Leona's was not the kind of place she ever thought she'd set foot in, crystal chandeliers. Live jazz, waiters with European accents. She nearly turned around. But Malcolm was already standing by the door. This time, no expensive overcoat, no suit, just a black turtleneck and dark jeans. He smiled politely. You came, he said. I said I would. He led her to a small booth in the corner, away from the crowd. A bottle of water was already sweating on the table. Thank you for last night, he began once they were seated. Not just for helping Isaiah, but for seeing him, really seeing him. Sarah met his eyes. He was just a kid in the rain. Anyone would have. That's not true, Malcolm interrupted. A lot of people passed him by, pretended not to see. You're not just anyone. There was a beat of silence. She didn't know what to say to that. Compliments from men like him came with expectations. But Malcolm's gaze didn't carry that same weight. It wasn't performative. It was weary. Honest. He doesn't trust people easily, Malcolm said. Since his mother passed, he's been quiet. Withdrawn. But last night he laughed. I haven't heard him laugh like that in years. Sarah softened. He's a sweet boy, sharp too. He notices more than people realize. He's blind, not oblivious, Malcolm said with a small smile. I keep forgetting that. I keep thinking I can just throw money at the pain and make it disappear. You can't buy presents, Sarah said softly. Kids know when you're not there. Malcolm looked down. The silence between them stretched, but it wasn't uncomfortable. Would you be willing to help? He asked finally. I'm not asking for charity. I'd like to hire you. Sarah blinked. Hire me? As what? A companion for Isaiah, he said. Someone to spend time with him after school, read with him, walk with him. Be a presence. Someone he trusts. Sarah leaned back slowly. And you want to pay me to do this? You'd be an employee. A real salary, benefits, even housing if you need it. She studied his face, looking for the trap. And why me? Because you didn't flinch when you saw him. Because you treated him like a person, not a burden. Not a charity case. Sarah thought of her rent notice, of the envelope on the kitchen counter back home marked, Final Notice. And then she thought of Isaiah's face, his smile. You really trust me? She asked. I trust my son's instincts, and I trust what I saw last night. She nodded once. Then I'm in. Malcolm exhaled like he'd been holding that breath the entire time. Good. He'll be happy. And maybe this is a chance for all of us to start again. Neither of them knew that this agreement, this quiet conversation in the back booth of a fancy restaurant, was the beginning of a storm far more personal than any rainstorm they had stepped through. A storm of past mistakes, buried secrets, and people who weren't ready to let Malcolm Grant change so easily. Sarah's first official day working with Isaiah started on a rainy Thursday afternoon. The Grant estate loomed like something out of a dream, or maybe a movie. Sarah stood outside the iron gates, her backpack clutched tight in one hand, as Malcolm's driver, Gerald, scanned her name and waved her through. The car hummed silently through a long, winding driveway, lined with manicured hedges and white stone fountains. When the front of the mansion came into view, Sarah had to physically stop herself from gasping. It wasn't the size that stunned her. It was the silence. The house, despite its grandeur, looked lonely. The butler opened the door before she could even knock. "Miss Daniels, welcome," the older man said with a courteous nod.
"Mr. Grant and Master Isaiah are in the library." "Master?" she repeated with a small grin. The butler didn't smile back. "Mr. Grant's father preferred traditional forms. It stuck." Sarah stepped inside, trying not to let her damp sneakers squeak on the marble. Every wall gleamed, every corner carefully arranged. But the silence, that same heavy hush she remembered from her childhood visits to rich white neighborhoods in Atlanta, made the place feel like a museum. She could already tell it wasn't built for laughter. Isaiah was sitting in a plush armchair by the window when she entered the library, his fingers running over a thick Braille book. Malcolm was seated across from him, distractedly typing on his laptop. At the sound of Sarah's footsteps, Isaiah lifted his head. "Miss Sarah?" he asked. His voice was calm, but there was a tension in it, like he was unsure if he was really allowed to hope. "I'm here," Sarah said, setting down her bag and kneeling beside him. "And I brought a surprise." Isaiah smiled, the lines of worry on his small face relaxing. "What kind?" Sarah reached into her bag and pulled out a battered audio recorder. "My little brother used to use this when his vision started failing. I found some of his old stories. Thought we could listen to one together." Malcolm looked up briefly, eyes narrowed with something unreadable, then returned to his laptop. They listened to the recording together, Isaiah leaning in, giggling at the silly pirate voice her brother had used in one of the stories. It was the first time Sarah heard him laugh out loud. Malcolm didn't look up again, but she noticed his typing slowed. The air in the room changed. Later, Sarah walked Isaiah out into the garden for fresh air. The rain had stopped, but the sky still hung grey and heavy. "I never had a friend like this," Isaiah said quietly, his hand resting lightly on her elbow. "Like what?" "Someone who doesn't sound tired when I talk." Sarah's chest tightened. "You're not a burden," she said. "You're brilliant, and it's okay to want people around." He nodded, then tilted his head. "My dad, he's trying. But I don't think he knows how to do regular." That made Sarah smile. "Nobody does. We all just fake it and hope for the best." Isaiah grinned. "You're different. You feel like real." Later that night, as Sarah was leaving, she passed through the foyer and caught Malcolm on his phone, voice low and tense. "No," I said quietly. "I don't want the press sniffing around yet. No, absolutely not." He turned and saw her just as she was about to duck out of sight. "Everything okay?" she asked. Malcolm's jaw clenched. "Just business. Things move fast in my world." Sarah didn't press, but something in his tone felt colder than usual. The next few days passed with a strange rhythm. Every time Sarah showed up, Isaiah became more animated, more comfortable. He even asked her to help him build a makeshift podcast setup in his room, insisting they record their conversations and turn them into adventures of a kid who can't see but sees everything. But behind the walls, something else was happening. One afternoon, as Sarah came in through the side entrance, she heard voices raised down the hallway. One male, older. One female, tight and furious. "You brought her in without vetting, Malcolm. She saved my son. That's more than I can say for anyone you've recommended. She's a waitress. Do you even know where she comes from?" Sarah stopped in her tracks. Then a third voice, deeper and more commanding. "If this goes south, Malcolm, the board will eat you alive. You're already on thin ice with the Africa Project debacle." Silence. Then footsteps approaching. Sarah ducked into the butler's pantry just as two men and a woman in sharp business wear passed. One of them glanced toward the kitchen as they moved past. His eyes lingered just long enough to send a chill down Sarah's spine. That night, She told Ava about it. Sounds like they think you're a threat. I'm just doing my job, Sarah said. Yeah, and maybe that's the problem. You're doing it too well. The next day, Sarah received a text from an unknown number. You're not who you pretend to be. You don't belong in that house. She stared at the screen, heart pounding. Another message followed seconds later. Quit before things get ugly. Sarah didn't reply. But that night, as she tucked Isaiah into bed and told him the next part of their pirate story, her voice was steadier than ever. I'm not going anywhere, she whispered, more to herself than to him. Not until the truth comes out. Because she was starting to suspect that being Isaiah's companion wasn't just about reading stories and feeding hope. It was about uncovering why so many people didn't want her there. And what exactly Malcolm Grant was trying so hard to protect. Rain poured hard against the mansion's windows that Saturday evening, blurring the lights of the city in the distance. Inside, the Grant estate was unusually quiet. Sarah sat with Isaiah in his room, the soft glow of a desk lamp lighting up the corner, where she was braiding the ends of yarn onto his new audio pirate hat, a silly idea he'd had for their podcast stories. Ms. Sarah, Isaiah said suddenly, do you ever miss your mom? Sarah paused mid-knot, her breath catching. All the time, she answered softly, even when I try not to. Isaiah nodded slowly. I don't remember mine at all. But sometimes I think I can feel her when I dream. Sarah reached over and took his hand gently. Maybe that's how she visits you, through dreams. He smiled, leaning back in his chair. Do you think my dad dreams? I think he used to, she replied. But sometimes grown-ups get scared of dreams, especially the ones that hurt. Just then, a soft knock at the door pulled them out of the moment. It was Malcolm. Mind if I come in? Isaiah immediately lit up. Dad! Hey, champ. Malcolm stepped in, suit jacket unbuttoned, tie loosened. He looked tired, but for once, he wasn't carrying his phone. Sarah moved to stand. I'll leave you two. No, stay, Malcolm said. Actually, I was hoping we could all talk. She looked between father and son and sat back down. Malcolm walked to the window, staring out into the rain before turning around slowly. Isaiah told me about the podcast you're working on, he said. I listened to the first one, and I heard him laugh. Sarah's eyes widened. You did? I haven't heard that sound in years, Malcolm said. Not since his mother passed. Silence filled the room like a third person. She would have loved you, he said, looking at Sarah. You remind me of her. Sarah wasn't sure what to say. Malcolm Grant rarely shared personal things, let alone complimented people so plainly. There was something fragile behind his composed face tonight. I don't usually let people in, he continued. But you've given my son something no therapist or school counselor has been able to. Joy. You made him feel normal. Isaiah tilted his head. She's my favorite person. Sarah smiled and placed her hand over his. Malcolm stepped forward. Which is why I need to tell you something. Her heart stilled. That tone, it wasn't casual. Malcolm glanced down before locking eyes with her. I received a background check request about you. From someone at the press. Sarah's stomach flipped. The request wasn't official, he continued. It came through a private channel. Someone's digging. She blinked. But why? I'm just a waitress. You're not just anything, Malcolm said. And someone thinks you're important enough to discredit. Sarah swallowed. Do you think it's someone inside your company? Malcolm nodded. I have my suspicions. And I don't believe it's about you. I think you've become a symbol of something they want to stop. Because of Isaiah? She asked. Because you're close to him. Because you're close to me now, he said flatly. For the first time since she'd met him, Malcolm didn't seem untouchable. He seemed exposed. There's more, he said, lowering his voice. I saw the security footage from last week. Someone accessed your personnel file. And they printed it. Sarah's eyes narrowed. Did you see who? Not clearly, but I'm working on it. And until I figure it out, I want you to be careful. Isaiah leaned closer. Is she in danger? Malcolm walked over and kneeled beside his son. No, buddy. She's safe. I just need her to stay close so I can make sure of it. Sarah folded her arms tightly. Why does this feel like something way bigger than a job? Malcolm looked at her long and hard. Because it is. Before she could speak again, Isaiah's doorbell chime sounded from the main house intercom. They exchanged confused glances. Malcolm stood and pressed a button on his watch. Mr. Grant, the butler's voice came through. You have an unexpected visitor. He says he's with the Department of Family and Child Services. Mr. Alan Brooks. Sarah's blood ran cold. DFCS? She said sharply. Why would they be here? I don't know, Malcolm said, but his jaw tightened instantly. Isaiah's case has been closed for years. He's under my full custody. Isaiah clutched Sarah's hand tighter. Malcolm looked at her. Stay with him. Don't leave this room. She nodded as he exited swiftly. Downstairs, the tension was palpable. Malcolm descended the stairs to see a man in his early 50s, with a clipboard and a polite but firm smile, standing in the foyer. Mr. Grant, he said. Alan Brooks. Sorry to drop by unannounced, but we received an anonymous concern regarding the care of your son. What concern? Allegations that he was left unsupervised in a public place? In the rain. Malcolm's stomach dropped. That incident was 3 weeks ago, he said, his voice cold. And you're here now because someone dug up a moment I already deeply regret. I'm here because protocol requires it, Brooks said. A wellness check. May I speak to the child? No, Malcolm said instantly. He's resting. And he has a right to not be re-traumatized by a stranger walking in unannounced. Brooks raised an eyebrow. You can talk to my legal team, Malcolm added. If you'd like to schedule an appointment. Brooks paused. Then, unexpectedly, he handed over a sealed envelope. And what's this? Malcolm asked. A formal notice. It's not just about the boy now. It's about the woman in your house. Malcolm opened it. Inside was a letter with Sarah's name. And an official request for interview regarding her possible manipulation of the Grant family for personal advancement, including contact with minors. His hands shook. He looked up slowly. Who filed this? Brooks met his eyes without blinking. It was anonymous, but you might want to start by asking your board. When Brooks left, the storm outside had begun again. Not just in the skies over Atlanta, but inside Malcolm's life. He took the letter upstairs, Sarah standing instantly when she saw his face. What is it? She asked. Malcolm handed it to her. Sarah read the first lines and sat back down in silence. Then, without lifting her head, she whispered, They're trying to erase me. Isaiah squeezed her hand tighter. No, Malcolm said, his voice steely. They just made their biggest mistake. Because now it wasn't just about kindness. It wasn't even about justice. Now it was war. The hallway outside the executive boardroom was silent, save for the soft clicking of high heels and the quiet hum of the fluorescent lights. Camille stood with her hand pressed against her clipboard, heart thudding as if it were trying to climb out of her chest.
She'd been through tough shifts and harder nights, but nothing had prepared her for this, facing an entire room full of powerful executives who believed she was a thief. Inside, voices clashed behind the tall mahogany doors, heated, impatient, skeptical. Then silence, and then a sharp voice called out, "Send her in." She took a breath, pushed the door, and stepped inside. The boardroom felt like a courtroom. Long glass table, 13 men and women in suits, their eyes narrowing with every step she took. At the far end sat Donovan Reed, his hands clasped tightly in front of him, the lines on his face etched deep. Beside him, Mark Winston, the company's head of global compliance, looked up with the cold precision of a man who liked to see people squirm. Camille straightened her back and walked to the center of the room. She clutched the folder she and Donovan had prepared, holding it like a lifeline. Mark didn't waste time. "Miss Camille Johnson, are you aware of why you've been summoned today?" "I am," she replied, voice steady though her hands trembled slightly. "There's an email that was sent from my account, a file containing confidential financial data. The board believes I leaked it." "Not believes," one of the members cut in. "The evidence is clear. The file came from your login. Your machine, your name." "But not me," Camille said calmly. "And I can prove it." There was a murmur of interest. Even Mark leaned forward, though the skepticism never left his eyes. "I have logs," she continued, opening the folder. "Security camera footage from the East Wing hallway. Entry records from my office that night, and a witness." "Witness?" Mark frowned. "Donovan Reed," she said, nodding toward him. "He was with me reviewing next quarter's HR analytics plan. He left just minutes before the breach occurred." "Interesting," someone murmured. She continued, "But the key is this." She slid a printed screenshot across the table. "This is the system log. It shows someone used a flash drive that evening, inserted at 6:47 p.m. I wasn't even in the room at that time. I stepped out to speak with facilities about the broken thermostat." Mark's fingers tapped the table. "You're saying someone else used your system while you were out?" Camille nodded. "Yes, Mr. Preston Frank." There was a long silence. Then, laughter. Quiet, mocking from Preston himself, seated at the far corner. "Are we really entertaining this?" A junior staffer accusing a board member? Camille turned to face him directly. "You came into my office that night. You said your laptop had frozen and asked to check a presentation file on mine." "I said yes. I stepped out, and when I came back, you were gone." "You smiled at me and said, 'Thanks, you're a lifesaver.'" Donovan stood. "I can confirm what she's saying." "I saw Frank in the hallway coming from her office as I returned. I didn't think anything of it, until the timing lined up." "Coincidence," Frank snapped, but Mark was now flipping through the logs. One entry caught his eye. He frowned. "USB serial ID. Matches the one used to breach a file in our Singapore office 6 months ago." He looked up. That was never solved. The temperature in the room dropped. Camille stepped forward. "I'm not here to make accusations without evidence." "But I wasn't the one who betrayed this company. I was just the one they tried to frame." Preston stood suddenly, his voice rising. "This is a setup. She's manipulating everyone. You're letting a waitress play you." "She's not a waitress," Donovan interrupted, his voice cutting through the room. "She's my employee. And the best one I've had in years." Frank's eyes darted from face to face. He could feel the tide turning. Mark stood, pushing his chair back slowly. "I think we've heard enough." The meeting ended without a vote. Preston was escorted out. Outside the room, Camille leaned against the wall, her breath shaking.
Donovan stepped beside her, silent for a moment. Then he spoke.
You didn't just save yourself in there.
You saved this company from rot. She looked at him. You believed me when no one else would. He smiled slightly. I saw who you were the moment you handed a shivering boy a plate of food without hesitation. You don't fake that kind of heart. Camille lowered her gaze, her throat tightening. But Donovan wasn't finished. This isn't over, he said. There's going to be noise, press, investigations. But you stood your ground, and from now on, no one in this building questions your worth again. She nodded, the weight finally beginning to lift. As she turned to leave, Donovan called out again. Camille. She looked back. You ever consider something more permanent here? Her brows lifted. What do you mean? A new role. One where you don't just put out fires, you help prevent them. Director of Human Insight. Camille's lips parted, stunned. She began. No pressure. Think about it. She smiled. I will. As she walked down the hallway, past the rows of glass offices and buzzing computers, her steps felt lighter. For the first time, she wasn't just passing through this world. She belonged here. And someone had finally seen it. The boardroom was uncomfortably quiet. Fluorescent lights hummed overhead, casting a pale glow on the long oak table where a dozen executives sat, some glancing at their watches, others exchanging wary looks. In the center, Desmond leaned forward with his fingers laced, elbows on the table. His expression was unreadable, carved in stone. Across from him sat Leonard Bryce, the company's chief strategy officer. Leonard was clean-shaven, sharp-suited, and visibly irritated. His tie was loosened just enough to suggest this meeting had already gone longer than he liked. She's not qualified, Leonard said at last, breaking the silence. Sarah sat beside Desmond, her hands clasped tightly on her lap. She didn't flinch. She didn't drop her gaze. She's a waitress, or was, Leonard continued, smirking. I'm sorry, but bringing her into our crisis meeting with stakeholders is not only unorthodox, it's reckless. Desmond turned his head slowly toward Leonard. She's the reason we didn't lose the Washington deal last week. Leonard's eyes flicked toward Sarah, and then back to Desmond. That was a coincidence. No, Desmond said flatly. That was clarity. Her advice on restructuring team communication was spot on, and you know it. Sarah finally spoke, her voice steady. You think I don't belong here, Mr. Bryce? That I'm just some charity case your boss is trying to uplift. Leonard said nothing, but his silence said enough. Sarah leaned forward. Let me ask you something. When was the last time you walked through the tech floor, asked the staff how they actually feel about the changes you push through every quarter? Leonard blinked. That's not my role. Exactly, Sarah said. That's the problem. No one down there trusts you. They think this company only values titles, not people. Enough, one board member interjected. This isn't a staff therapy session. No, it's a company hemorrhaging loyalty, Sarah replied, sharper now. And until someone starts treating people like they matter, not as liabilities or low-tier hires, you're going to keep losing your best assets. Desmond gave a faint nod, the corner of his mouth twitching. Not quite a smile, but close. The room shifted. A few executives looked at each other. Others began to murmur. Sarah exhaled and sat back. She hadn't meant to go that far, but she couldn't let this become a room where power shut truth down. Just then, a junior assistant entered and handed Desmond a sealed envelope. He opened it, scanned the contents, then leaned back slowly. Well, he said, voice cool, it seems someone filed a formal complaint against Sarah 2 days ago. Anonymous. accusing her of accessing confidential client data. The room tensed. Leonard sat up straighter. Desmond laid the papers on the table. The IT audit team traced the complaint and the digital trail. The access came from Leonard Bryce's credentials. And not just that, it was used on Sarah's assigned desktop. The same hour she was in a meeting with me. Gasps. One board member whispered, "Is this a setup?" Leonard's jaw clenched. "That's absurd." "Is it?" Desmond asked, standing slowly. "You've been undermining her since the day I hired her, monitoring her logins, twisting meetings, even planting whispers about her past. I let it go, thinking maybe it was just pride." "But this?" He tapped the paper. "This is sabotage." Leonard's face flushed red. "You can't prove—" "I don't need to," Desmond cut him off. "The logs prove it. The file access, the security cam footage." Leonard stood too, his chair scraping the floor. "You're making a mistake. She's manipulating you. You're letting some pretty face with a tragic backstory undo years of structure." "No," Desmond said, voice deadly calm. "I'm letting someone with integrity, courage, and heart show this company how to survive the next 10 years. The board fell silent again. Leonard's lips parted as if to argue, but he saw it, the shift in the room. They weren't with him anymore. Desmond turned to Sarah. "You've earned this seat. You've earned their ears." Sarah swallowed hard, blinking back the emotion building in her throat. Leonard stared at Desmond. "You'll regret this." "I already regret giving you as much trust as I did," Desmond said. "Security will escort you out." Moments later, Leonard's footsteps echoed as he was walked out of the boardroom. Sarah remained seated, still stunned. Desmond sat back beside her. "You all right?" he asked softly. I didn't expect it to come to that," she whispered. "People like him don't expect consequences," Desmond said. "That's why they think they can get away with things." Sarah looked around the table. The room still hummed with unspoken shock, but no one challenged her. No one undermined her presence. "You didn't just survive that," Desmond added. "You led it." She turned her face toward him, her expression unreadable. But inside, something was shifting. She had just learned something vital. Not all power comes from status. Sometimes, it comes from the courage to speak truth in a room where it's not welcome. Outside the boardroom, down the hallway, Desmond's assistant was waiting. "Sir," she said, "Mr. Bryce left this on his desk." "Thought you should see it." She handed him a second folder, thinner, but marked confidential. Desmond frowned and opened it. His expression changed immediately. This is Sarah's personnel record from her previous job." He read quickly, heart pounding. She had once filed a whistleblower complaint at her old company, a move that led to the firing of 2 senior execs and nearly destroyed the firm's reputation. "She never mentioned this," he murmured. He looked up, brows furrowed. Why had she kept this secret? And more importantly, was she hiding anything else? Sarah, down the hall, stood alone by the window, unaware her own past was about to become the next storm to weather. Desmond stood alone in his office, holding the folder tightly in one hand. Outside his floor-to-ceiling windows, the city shimmered beneath the evening sky, but his eyes weren't on the skyline. They were glued to the contents of Sarah's past. A whistleblower. She had reported 2 senior executives for embezzlement at her previous job, a mid-sized logistics firm in Baltimore. The report had been quiet at first, internal. But when her superiors tried to silence her, she escalated it to the press. The fallout was massive. The company folded within a year. Hundreds lost jobs. The media painted her as a hero, or a traitor, depending on which outlet you read. And then,
She vanished. No public statements, no interviews, just disappeared. Until now. Desmond paced the room, torn between admiration and suspicion.
Why hadn't she told him this? Why not mention it during her hiring process, or even after everything they'd gone through? He picked up the phone and called down to HR.
I want a full background check on Sarah Harper. Every job, every reference.
And check for any sealed settlements or court documents. Discreetly. Of course, sir, the voice answered. Desmond hung up and looked at the folder again. The articles were yellowed, the photos grainy, but unmistakable. Sarah in front of a courthouse. Sarah refusing to speak to reporters. Sarah being escorted by security while protesters shouted her name. He had trusted her with board access, with his son, with parts of himself he hadn't opened in years. But this was calculated silence. In the hallway, Sarah was laughing softly with Claire from accounting, unaware of the storm gathering behind Desmond's glass walls. That night, Desmond didn't go home. He sat in his office until well past midnight, reading every article, every report. And with each line, the doubt crept further into him. Was she still the same woman who stood by his son in the rain? Or was she someone who knew how to weaponize truth for her own gain? 2 days passed. Sarah noticed Desmond growing colder. Less present, more distracted. During meetings, his eyes lingered on her face, like he was searching for something beneath the surface. "Everything okay?" she asked gently one morning in the elevator. He forced a smile. "Busy, that's all." But she knew something had shifted. That afternoon, she was called into his office, alone. Desmond didn't ask her to sit. He held up the folder, the same one that had kept him up for 2 nights. "Why didn't you tell me?" he asked. Sarah's heart dropped. Her stomach flipped. She didn't need to ask what he meant. She took a slow breath. "Because I didn't want it to define me." "It's part of who you are," Desmond said. "A big part." "Yes," she replied calmly, "but not the whole story." Desmond's face was unreadable. "You took down an entire company." "I told the truth," she said. "They were stealing from clients, from their own staff. People begged me not to speak up." "I did anyway, and I paid for it." He folded his arms. "Why didn't you tell me when I hired you?" "Because I was tired of walking into rooms where people had already made up their minds about me. I wanted a fresh start." Desmond hesitated. "Do you regret what you did?" Sarah didn't blink. Not for a second. He studied her face for a long time. "What if someone in this company crossed the line?" he asked. "I'd report it," she said without hesitation, "even if it were me." The question hovered in the air, unspoken. "I need to know I can trust you," Desmond said finally. Sarah stepped closer. "You can, but I need to know you trust me not just when it's easy." There was a pause. Then Desmond leaned back in his chair, exhaling hard. "I don't want secrets," he said. "Neither do I," she replied. And in that moment, the room softened. Not completely, but enough. Later that day, Desmond visited the legal department. As he left, he passed Leonard's old office, now empty, but his gaze lingered. Something didn't sit right. "Pull Bryce's last 6 months of financial activities," he said to his head of security. "Bank accounts, personal transfers." "I want to know who he was talking to." That night, while Sarah walked home from work, a man in a black hoodie stepped out from behind a car and placed something in her mailbox, then disappeared into the shadows. Inside her apartment, she found the envelope. No name, no return address. Inside, only a single sheet of paper. "I know what you did,
And I know what you're doing now. Walk away before it all burns again. She sat on her couch, staring at the message. Her hands trembled, but her spine remained straight. The past had come knocking, but this time she wouldn't run. She folded the note, placed it in her drawer, and picked up her phone. "Desmond," she said when he answered. "We need to talk." "Now." His voice was low. "I was just about to call you. I think we've both been dragged into something bigger than either of us realized." And outside both of their windows in two different corners of the city, eyes watched. Waiting. Planning the next move. The morning was unusually quiet. Sarah sat in Desmond's private office, a cup of untouched coffee trembling in her hand. Across from her, Desmond leaned against his desk, his brow furrowed, holding the threatening letter she had brought. "You sure no one saw who left this?" he asked. She nodded. "I only saw it after my shift. It was tucked into the mailbox with no name. Just this message." Desmond scanned the words again. "Walk away before it all burns again." "This has to be connected to Leonard," he muttered. Sarah looked up. "Or someone who knows what he was doing. Someone still here." Desmond exhaled, his mind racing. "I had security pull bank records." Leonard was receiving payments from a shell company based in Delaware, monthly transfers, all under different aliases. We're talking hundreds of thousands. Sarah's face went still. "Bribes?" Desmond nodded. "Looks like it. He was feeding internal information to a competitor. About our logistics contracts, tech investments, even employee records." Her stomach dropped. "That would explain the email leak, why they tried to pin it on me. I was in the way." Desmond stepped forward. "You weren't just in the way. You were the only one asking questions, the only one actually looking." There was a beat of silence between them. Sarah asked softly, "What do we do?" Desmond didn't hesitate. "We fight." That afternoon, he called an emergency board meeting. He didn't say why. Just that it was urgent and mandatory. At 3:00 p.m. sharp, every board member was seated in the glass conference room, their expressions mixed with curiosity and caution. Sarah stood beside Desmond at the front of the room. This time she wasn't just the new hire, she was the key witness. Desmond cleared his throat. "I'll get straight to it. Over the last 2 weeks, we've uncovered evidence that a senior member of this board has been feeding sensitive information to outside interests. That same person tried to frame Sarah for the data leak." Whispers rippled through the room. Sarah opened a folder and handed copies of the evidence to each member. Time-stamped emails, payment records, login activity logs, all tracing back to Leonard. One man leaned forward, voice tight. "But Leonard is gone. Physically," Desmond said. "But not legally. He's still on the board until the next vote, and someone's still protecting him." A pause. Then a voice broke in from the back. "You're making serious accusations, Desmond. Do you have proof Leonard acted alone?" Desmond's eyes narrowed. "No, that's why we're here. We believe someone else on this board helped cover it up, or at the very least, knew and stayed silent." Eyes darted across the table. Sarah stepped forward. "This isn't just about corporate espionage, it's about integrity. The company almost destroyed me to protect someone who didn't deserve that protection." She pulled out the letter. "This was left in my mailbox, a threat. Telling me to walk away, but I won't. I won't let someone use fear to silence the truth. Not again." Silence stretched. Then a slow clap echoed from the end of the table. It was Mr. Callahan, the oldest board member. White hair, wrinkled face, but sharp eyes. "You've got spine, Ms. Harper," he said. "More than most in this room. I say we vote. Suspend Leonard immediately."
and launch a full audit on the last 18 months of internal activity. Several heads nodded. Desmond looked around.
All in favor?
Hands went up. Every single one.
By the end of the day, Leonard's accounts were frozen, a subpoena had been filed, and the internal review team was activated under Sarah's supervision. As the boardroom emptied, Desmond turned to Sarah. "You did it," he said quietly. "We did it," she corrected. "Together." He smiled. "You're staying, right?" Sarah smirked. "Wasn't planning on going anywhere." Later that week, Desmond invited her to dinner. Not as her boss, but as something more. They sat at a quiet rooftop restaurant, the lights of the city flickering like stars beneath them. Jacob joined for dessert, clinging to Sarah's arm like he'd known her forever. "I'm glad she didn't leave," Jacob whispered to his father when Sarah stepped away to take a phone call. Desmond smiled down at his son. "Me too." When Sarah returned, she slipped into her seat and said, "So, I got a call from a friend at the Tribune. They want to run a story." Desmond raised an eyebrow. "About Leonard?" "No," she said. "About whistleblowers." "About courage. About how standing up doesn't always mean standing alone." Desmond nodded. "You should do it." Sarah smiled. "I will, but on one condition." "What's that?" "That they mention the waitress who fed a blind boy in the rain and had no idea his billionaire father was watching." Desmond laughed softly. "I think they'll like that part." They clinked glasses. And for the first time in years, Desmond didn't feel like a man trapped in power or legacy. He felt human. He felt hopeful. And as Sarah looked out across the city, strong, bold and unshaken, she knew that she didn't just save herself. She'd changed the system that once tried to break her at the end. If this story moved you, take a second to share your thoughts in the comments. What would you do if your past returned at the height of your new beginning? And would you stand firm, no matter who was watching? Don't forget to like, share and subscribe to the channel for more powerful true stories just like this. Your support means the world, and your voice matters. See you in the next one.